The reading in Matthew, again, it's chapter 10, okay? But he gives a powerful line. He says, he said to his apostles, he said, behold, I'm sending you like sheep in the midst of wolves. So be shrewd as serpents and simple as doves. But be aware of men. They'll hand you over to courts and scourge you in their synagogues. You'll be led before governors and kings for my sake as witnesses before them and the pagans. When they hand you over, don't worry about what you're to say or what you're to do or speak. You'll be given at that moment what you are to say. It's not you who speak, the Spirit of your Father speaking through you. I'd like to just, as I read that just now, I was thinking, I think of my fellow Passionists who were in China, and they took a beating, okay, by the communists, okay? And I remember, I told you these stories, good Lord, you've heard them all so many times. The little Paul Ubinger, okay? You had to know, I knew him, he died, I think, in 62 or 63, but I was a novice, and he was living in St. Mike, it was St. Paul the Cross Monastery in Pittsburgh, okay, where we were in the bishop. He was just a sweet little old man, okay? And he had been in prison in China. He and Basil Bauer, a bunch of those guys. It's a privilege in life to live with the victims, to live with those whose faith was heroic, the living martyrs of the church. These guys were. They didn't die, their friends died. I remember Baz and a couple of the fellas. Baz was one of them. But they were looking at their photographs. They're like an album, and in it there was pictures, and they said, these are dead, these are dead. They were killed by the communists precisely because they were Christian. And Paul Ubinger and Baz, there were others, Bishop Cuthbert O'Gara, famously called the stretcher bishop by Fulton Sheen when he came out of China, what was left of him. He ordained me to minor orders in 66. I was stationed with him too. We were blessed by being stationed with what I call the China hands. Those were the guys that went to China that were imprisoned. You were living with martyrs. Great privilege in my life, I have to say. But I remember a story that Paul Ubinger told about being questioned by the communists, interrogated. Well, he had hearing aids, okay? I met a long time ago, okay? This is, 50, 60 years ago, whatever it was. Whatever it was, in the 50s. I guess it would have been in the 50s. I saw him, it was in the 50s. But he had a hearing aid, so what he said, he had shut the hearing aids off, and he just looked at them. They kept talking to him, and he couldn't hear them. He said, I shut the thing off. These guys were so courageous. I said that, was it Baz? I might have said this, it was Basil. It was Baz Bauer. He was one tough guy. God, he was a good guy. Tough. Woof. These guys were really tough. I said to him, would you ever go back? He said, I'd walk back if I could. I think it was Baz or Paul said that to me. One of the guys, they were China hand. I'd walk back if I could. Some of the men did get back after China opened up, and they found the families, they found the remnants of the families that still had the faith, the blood of the martyrs. They still had the faith. Isn't that a great story? Huh? Isn't that a great story? What a great privilege in my life. 60 years ago. Huh? The early 60s, to be with men that had really done, just with this gospel, suffered at the hands of those who hated the church, hated Christianity. And they preached to them by the way they were martyred. Now, they weren't physically martyred, but by the way they endured their punishment. They never became hateful men. Even when I talked about the communists, although Baz did get a great line off one time to my brother, when Pete was going to Korea, he was in the army, he said to him, say hello to the communists for me. At a point of a bullet. He said that to Pete. You leave it to Baz, I don't know. But they didn't even, that was rare. It's the only time I ever heard them. Not that they liked the communists at all. These were profoundly Christian men. What they went through. To this day, I remember them. I think My friend Sarah visited. I was in New York a couple of years ago, and Sarah was living in New York. So we went out to lunch or something. She met me in Jamaica. I said, I want to show you something. So I took her to the backyard of the monastery, to the garden. It's not the backyard, it's the garden. And there's the cemetery. I don't know how many of the Passionists are buried there, but I showed him the men that made such a difference in my life, but I also showed him the tombstones, the markers of the Passionists that were in China. I'm pretty sure I did, because I would never pass that up. When you're in the presence of the sacred and the heroic, you have to acknowledge it. You have to. To this day, whenever I'm in their presence, but I'm in the presence of all who have loved me. When I see the men of the outfit, I'm reduced to silence, just to be quiet. Just to be quiet in the presence of the heroic. The blood of the martyrs. And I lived with those martyrs. One of the great, great privileges of my life. And to even be ordained by Cuthbert. Just the minor orders. He died very soon thereafter, what Fulton Sheen called the stretcher bishop. He came out on a stretcher. Those guys were emaciated. They were starving in the prisons. You had to see the pictures of what these men looked like. My God, Justin Garvey looked like death warmed over. Marcellus White. These two guys were as big and strong as you could get when they went in. You had to see them when they came out. They were emaciated. Yeah. You know what they did? They went right back into the missions. Rehab, they went right back into the missions, this time to the Philippines. I know that they would have gone back to China if they could have. They would have. And I know in their hearts, they loved the people of China that they'd served. They were their friends. And they know that their friends were killed because of them. That has to be a burden in the heart. To know that because you preached the gospel to someone, they died because of it. They were martyred. Because they believed in the Christ you preached. In some ways, you were martyred with them. I can't imagine somebody who I loved and loved intensely were killed precisely because I loved them. Precisely. I talk about a double martyrdom. They are martyred in the flesh, you're martyred in the heart. And that's the truth. But those men must have thought in the silence of their prayers as they knelt in the choir quietly, probably remembering the faces, the hearts and souls of their friends who were killed because they were friends. Isn't that something, huh? That's a true story I told you. I probably told you that many times before. I don't know if I did or I didn't. I don't care. I can't hear a text, I can't read a text like this and not think of Baz and Paul and Cuthbert and so many others. Marcellus White, Justin Garvey. You had to see how emaciated they were when they came out of China. The pictures, when I knew them, they were already healthy. They were restored. But it's the truth. It's a privilege and a grace. It's a privilege and a grace to live with the heroic, who were the silent martyrs, whose martyrdom was the martyrdom of their friends. And to be with them, to pray with them, to be with them, to sit in the dining room with them. In the silence of the monastic lunch and dinner, we ate in silence. You were sitting across from sheer eloquence, the eloquence of a martyred heart. That's the truth. That's the truth. It was a privilege, a blessing of the First Order to sit with the martyrs.